He reached into the iron cage where the tiger was locked up, wanting to feed the tiger himself, only to see the tiger slowly approaching him. Seeing his determined eyes, the tiger tentatively sniffed the food in the boy's hand. The sudden appearance of his father frightened the tiger, and it quickly ran away. The father angrily asked Pi if he wanted to die. However, Pi retorted that wild animals also have souls. Seeing his son so innocent, the father decided to teach him a good lesson with practical actions. The father asked someone to bring a sheep and tie it outside the iron cage. The mother was afraid that the bloody scene would scare the child. However, compared to the possibility of being scared, the father wanted him to have a lesson that he would remember for life. When the gate that locked the tiger was opened again, the tiger, smelling the prey, slowly walked out again. In just a moment, the goat was dragged into the cage by the tiger and killed. This scene made Pi never dare to treat the tiger as a dog again, and the reason why he had the opportunity to do such a dangerous experiment. Because their family has a huge zoo. Because the zoo's income is pretty good, Pi has lived an enviable and carefree life since he was a child. However, when he went to school, he began to have troubles. His name is Piscine, which means swimming pool in French. His father hopes that he has a pure heart. Unexpectedly, because Piscine is similar to the pronunciation of P, his name changed from the elegant French swimming pool name to the dirty Indian public toilet. Since then, he has been called P in school. In order to change the situation, when he introduced himself in the new semester, Piscine changed his name to the first two letters of the pinyin. Then, it is said that he is similar to the 16th letter of the Greek alphabet. In the field of mathematics, he is also called Pi. Then he wrote thousands of decimal places in one breath. This incident directly shocked the whole school. From then on, he became the legendary Pi of the whole campus. The reason why he could fight back so powerfully was all thanks to his father, who advocated science and rationality. When his father was a child, he had polio. When he was lying in bed in unbearable pain, he prayed to God for a miracle. However, it was Western medicine that saved him in the end. Since then, his father has become an atheist. Unlike his father, his mother is a staunch religious believer. Perhaps influenced by his mother, Pi has been crazy about the gods in the church since he was a child. When Pi was 12 years old, he made a bet with his brother. He ran to the church to drink holy water secretly, but was caught by the priest here. The priest did not teach him a lesson, but brought him a glass of water. Pi was deeply attracted by the story of Jesus. From this day on, Pi began to believe in Christianity again. However, it is not over here another accidental opportunity. Pi encountered the Islamic church in the town, although he did not understand Arabic. But the rhythm of Islamic prayers made him feel closer to God. So Pi converted to Islam again. At this point, Pi has already converted to 3 different religions at the same time. His father, who believed in science, told him that believing in so many things at once was equivalent to believing in nothing. However, his mother believed that science can help us understand external things, but religion can help us resolve our inner troubles. Because of his religious beliefs, Pi has always believed that every animal has its own soul. As long as you treat it well, it will not hurt you. In order to verify his beliefs, Pi plans to take bloody meat and feed it to the tiger in the cage with his own hands. Then the opening scene happened, and the bloody lesson broke Pi's previous cognition. For a long time afterwards, he felt that life was meaningless. Until the appearance of a girl named Anandi, his life was stirred up again. Pi, who was attracted to her, started chasing her madly, and soon they fell in love with each other. However, before the two could further deepen their relationship, Pi received bad news. Due to the loss of government subsidies, the zoo could not continue to operate. So his father decided to ship all the animals to North America and sell them. Then, he led the family to move to Canada. Although Pi repeatedly opposed, he could not stop his father as the head of the family. What's more, his father had already bought the boat ticket in advance. Before leaving, Pi stayed with Anandi. In her, Pi seemed to have found a better feeling than faith. On the day of departure, Pi received a bracelet from Anandi. But strangely, he remembered everything that day. But he could not remember how to say goodbye to Anandi. When the golden sunset on the horizon sprinkled on the sea, Pi looked at his hometown that was gradually going away and felt a lot of emotions in his heart. At this time, his mother came to his side and comforted him that everything his father did was for your good. Instead of feeling a lot of emotions, it is better to go to the restaurant to have a full meal first. Unexpectedly, there was a problem when serving food because Pi and his mother only eat vegetarian food due to religious beliefs. However, the hateful chef poured beef gravy on them and said that cows were also vegetarians when they were alive. For this reason, his father directly fought with the chef, and finally they could only eat white rice and bananas to fill their stomachs. During this period, a Buddhist sailor told them that gravy was not considered meat on the ship, but at most a condiment. So even vegetarians could eat it. However, they still did not adopt the sailor's opinion. A few days later, the ship sailed to the Mariana Trench, the deepest place in the world. At night, the strong wind brought huge waves and kept hitting the deck. The ship began to shake on a sea, and Pi, who was awakened, walked out of the cabin. At first, he felt very excited and kept shouting madly to the sky, asking the storm to come more violently. God seemed to hear Pi's voice, and the hull tilted directly in the next second. Realizing the danger, Pi rushed into the cabin and tried to save his family. However, when he opened the cabin, the huge water flow pushed him out directly. Pi, who was at a loss, could only return to the deck again. At this time, the accompanying animals had escaped from the iron cage and could only run around on the ship because of fear. In the chaos, Pi was pushed onto a lifeboat, and then a zebra jumped directly onto the lifeboat. In this way, the small boat was smashed directly into the sea, and the boat was swaying in the huge waves, like an ant falling into boiling water and rolling constantly. At this time, Pi found that someone seemed to be swimming towards him in the sea. In a hurry, Pi hurriedly threw a life buoy. When the other party approached, he found that it was the tiger he had tried to feed. Pi wanted to stop it, but it was too late. After the tiger got on the boat, the frightened Pi turned around and jumped into the water. In the sea water wrapped by huge waves, he watched with his own eyes that the passenger ship was swallowed by the sea bit by bit. With no way out, Pi could only climb onto the lifeboat again. He held onto the mast and spent a sad and thrilling night. The next day, everything returned to calm. Without time to deal with his emotions, Pi began to clean up the water on the lifeboat. At this time, the fallen zebra was lying on the bow groaning. His hind legs were injured, and he could no longer stand up. Just as Pi was curious about where the tiger had gone, a hyena suddenly emerged from under the tarpaulin. Its appearance instantly made the situation on the boat tense. Pi could only quickly climb onto the mast again to avoid it. Fortunately, because of the constant shaking of the hull, the uncomfortable hyena did not attack the zebra and Pi for the time being. Not long after, an orangutan floated over on a banana. Pi recognized that he was his playmate since childhood in the zoo. So, Pi quickly rescued it to the boat. Pi wanted to knock on a hole with an iron bucket to see if there were other people nearby or if he could be rescued. As a result, the hyena in the cabin was knocked out. Fortunately, the hyena had not recovered from seasickness at this time. In this way, everyone was deadlocked from day to night. The hyena, who had recovered, began to move and would attack the zebra from time to time. Although Pi and the gorilla shouted to stop it, it was of little use. Until the morning of this day, Pi was still lying on the mast. But he was exhausted and would fall into the sea from time to time. In order to solve this problem, Pi returned to the ship to search for supplies. He made a simple raft with the supplies on the ship. Before Pi put the raft into the water, the hungry hyena came out to eat the zebra's body again. The gorilla was very dissatisfied with this, and the hyena attacked it directly. But he was slapped to the ground by the gorilla. Just when Pi was excited about the gorilla's behavior, the hyena suddenly jumped up and bit the gorilla to death. Looking at the gorilla's body, Pi couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a dagger and kept yelling at the hyena angrily. At this moment, the tiger under the tarpaulin suddenly jumped out and killed the hyena with one bite. In order to prevent himself from becoming the next target of the tiger, Pi quickly threw the raft into the water and then jumped directly into the sea. When he was really hungry, he dared to go back to the boat to find food while the tiger was resting. Fortunately, there were many canned foods and compressed biscuits in the cabin. Just when Pi was feasting, he found a mouse stealing food on the boat. But before Pi could think about it, the tiger suddenly pounced on him. In a hurry, Pi grabbed the mouse and threw it directly into the tiger's mouth, and then took the opportunity to quickly jump off the boat. Before he could dodge, the tiger chased him again. Fortunately, there was enough meat on the boat, so the tiger planned to save Pi's meat for later. The sea was surprisingly quiet at night, with no wind or waves around, and Pi and the tiger looked at each other from a distance. At this moment, his tears burst out. Now, the only one who could accompany him was a ferocious tiger. Pi knew very well that in this confrontation, the tiger had completely gained the upper hand. And if he wanted to survive, it would be extremely difficult. So the night passed quickly. The next day, the morning light dyed the sea golden. The sky was high and the clouds were vast, like a dream, and Pi and the boat seemed to be floating in the sky, hidden in the clouds with gold edges. Pi wrote a letter for help with a pen he found, put it in a drifting bottle, and threw it into the sea. The tiger occupied the cabin, and Pi could only retreat to the small raft. Pi prayed devoutly, hoping to get guidance from God. Perhaps the gods really sensed his presence, and Pi found inspiration for survival in a life-saving manual. Stay calm, collect fresh water to conserve energy. The most important point is to handle the relationship between himself and the tiger. The best way to do this is to tame it. So, Pi began to use wind and waves and ropes to control the hull. While making the tiger seasick, he kept whistling to stimulate it. This can make the tiger seasick due to conditioned reflex, which is also a method used by circus trainers. When the tiger was too dizzy to bear it on the boat, Pi took the opportunity to jump on the boat and watched the tiger hide aside in fear. Pi took the opportunity to unbutton his pants and tried to divide his territory with urine. As a result, he was washed into the sea by the tiger's urine. It seemed to be mocking Pi and said that everything was under its control. In the end, this training could only end in failure. Since he couldn't win on the boat, Pi, who had learned to collect fresh water, began to starve the tiger. When the tiger was too thirsty to bear it, Pi brought a little fresh water to it and whistled to stimulate it. Since the tiger needed at least 5 kilograms of meat every day, the meat on the boat had been eaten by the tiger at this moment. If the tiger was starving, it would definitely not let Pi go. In order to strike first, Pi began to try to fish for the tiger. However, fishing is not easy for a novice. The tiger, who couldn't wait, jumped directly into the sea, but fishing in the sea is not that simple. Pi laughed at the tiger, who also couldn't catch any fish, but he couldn't laugh the next second. The tiger, who couldn't catch any fish, turned around and swam towards him. Pi had to tighten the reins quickly and luckily climbed onto the boat at the last moment when the tiger launched an attack. Then, Pi quickly pulled the raft up. Without anything to climb on, the tiger could only float in the water and circle around the boat. Pi raised his axe and wanted to kill the tiger. However, when he saw the tiger's pure eyes again, he changed his mind. Pi spent a day to expand his raft. At night, he built a ladder with wooden boards and let the exhausted tiger return to the boat. Pi returned to the sea with all the supplies on the boat. In order to prevent himself from becoming the tiger's food, Pi had to find a way to get food for the tiger. That day, a big fish suddenly got into the fishing net, and Pi tried his best to control it. Then he killed the fish with an axe. Watching the colorful fish gradually lose its color, Pi began to repent and shed tears of self-blame. When Pi threw the fish to the tiger in the boat, he blew the whistle in his hand again. This is also a process of gradual domestication. Hearing the tiger feasting in the cabin, Pi quietly hid back in the raft. That night, countless silver jellyfish suddenly appeared in the sea. The sky was shining with stars like diamonds, and the sea and the sky were shining against each other, so beautiful that it was breathtaking. Seeing the scene, Pi's mood relaxed a little. He stirred the sea water diligently, letting the fluorescent splash. At this time, a whale quietly appeared beside him, and the whale suddenly jumped up. The huge waves directly overturned the raft, and all the supplies fell into the water with Pi. The whale turned around and left in style. Without food, Pi could only return to the boat again. Pi wanted to take a tool back to the sea to catch fish, but the awakened tiger came out again. Just as the tiger bared his teeth at him, a fish suddenly hit Pi's face. Pi wanted to throw it directly into the tiger's mouth like he threw the mouse last time. Unexpectedly, the fish flew out directly. Just as they were wondering, there was a loud noise behind them. Then, a large number of flying fish rushed straight to the boat. They became the target of the flying fish. At this moment, a tuna chasing the flying fish jumped directly into the cabin. The tiger wanted to take a bite directly, but Pi suddenly realized that it was time to establish his authority. He picked up a stick and kept attacking the tiger. Seeing that resistance was fruitless, the tiger had to give up the tuna and eat the small fish in the cabin. That night, Pi, who had always been a vegetarian, ate tuna sashimi. Considering that he couldn't take risks every time he returned to the boat, Pi decided to take the initiative to attack and tame the tiger. He first prepared a long enough stick and then used the trainer's method of hitting the tiger with a stick and giving him a piece of candy. Soon the tiger lost his temper, and finally Pi successfully established his majesty in front of the tiger by suppressing his momentum. In this way, after a game of chess, the man and the tiger finally chose to compromise and live in peace with each other. From then on, Pi had a pleasant time. Pi not only built a pavilion, but also stored a lot of fishing rods as supplies. In his spare time, he can also use a pen to record his observations and feelings. One day, when Pi was killing time, he saw a large group of dolphins chasing and playing. Just when he was excited, he found a huge ship not far away. Pi hurriedly took out a flare to send help. However, until the golden afterglow permeated the entire sea surface. All the flares on his body were fired, and he did not get any rescue in the end. After a while, they had no strength on the boat, and only large and small fish kept passing through the bottom of the boat. They had not eaten for a long time and were all exhausted. That night, the tiger looked at the starry sky, and no one knew what he was thinking. Pi looked towards the sea, but saw the tiger. At this time, he could no longer distinguish between reality and illusion. A red octopus caught a big fish. Then, the big fish turned into an animal in a zoo. Then Pi saw his mother's face and the ship that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. At this time, the tiger was staring at Pi from the other side of the boat, examining him as if he was peeping into Pi's heart. In this seemingly real and illusory drift, Pi wrote a diary with the only pencil left. Words were like his spiritual support at sea, but now the pencil has been used up. However, the real despair is not losing hope, but how to face the cruel reality. That evening, the sea was no longer as calm as before. Dark clouds rolled in, and a storm was about to hit. Before Pi was ready, the huge waves instantly submerged him. A golden light flashed in the clouds, and then the lightning was like a dragon's claw, tearing the sky and piercing the sea of clouds. In the storm, Pi roared to the sky, angrily questioning the God he believed in. "I have lost everything. What do you want from me?" However, his voice was so subtle in the storm. After the wind and waves, the sea returned to calm. Just like last time, the storm took away everything Pi had. All the materials that had been carefully prepared before, including the raft, disappeared mercilessly with the seawater. And with it, the hope that Pi had always maintained disappeared. Pi seemed to have lost all chances of survival, and the tiger was already dying. At this moment, the strongest will in Pi's heart was fading little by little, and the spiritual pillar was gradually collapsing. He came to the tiger and held the tiger in his arms, gently stroked its forehead, quietly waiting for death to come. He prayed to God for the last time, thanking God for giving him life, and Pi was ready to leave at any time. Unexpectedly, when he woke up again, Pi found that he was not only alive, but also docked on a magical island. The island was covered with magical mosses and roots, both of which tasted very delicious. When he walked carefully into the depths of the island, he found that there were countless meerkats living here, and they didn't seem to be afraid of Pi's arrival. In addition, the water in the pond here was drinkable fresh water. Pi jumped into the water excitedly and swam again after drinking enough. Pi came to a beach and rested on the side when he was tired. The afternoon sun was gentle and warm, and the tiger suddenly appeared in front of him. It was happily enjoying a luxurious buffet. Compared with the previous drifting life, this place is simply heaven. After eating and drinking, Pi came to the woods. He built a temporary nest on the tree and prepared to take a nap first. At this time, something strange happened. All the meerkats began to flee frantically, and the tiger also ran quickly towards the direction of the boat. Animals are most likely to sense danger. Sure enough, a terrible thing happened that night. The freshwater pool that could be swam in during the day has now become like a strong acid. A large number of fish died and were being dissolved in the water bit by bit. Pi reached out and plucked a glowing flower from the tree. After opening it, he was surprised to find that it contained a human tooth. It turned out that this island that looked like a woman lying on it was actually a cannibal island. Thinking of this, Pi decided to leave here tomorrow morning. Pi didn't want to die alone here and didn't want to be swallowed and dissolved by this cannibal island. So, after storing enough supplies, Pi called the tiger again. Unexpectedly, the tiger didn't have any nostalgia, but jumped onto the boat with him. Finally, after 227 days of drifting, the boat crossed the entire Pacific Ocean. Finally, it was washed to the coast of Mexico by the waves. The woods not far away were getting closer and closer, and the seawater under his feet was getting shallower and shallower. The moment his feet stepped on the soft sand, Pi knew that his drifting life was about to end. He struggled to climb ashore, but he lay on the ground and could no longer move. The tiger was so hungry that it was skinny. It stretched its body and then staggered towards the jungle. At the edge of the jungle, the tiger stopped. Pi looked up hard, hoping that the tiger would look back at him. However, the tiger did not do so. It just stared at the depths of the jungle silently and then went in without looking back. Not long after, Pi was found by local residents. At the moment of being rescued, he broke down and cried like a child. This was not to celebrate his rescue, but because he did not understand the tiger who had been with him through life and death. Why did he not feel any nostalgia when he parted? The tiger's departure was like Pi's only hope in the world. Pi knew that he really had nothing. After he was rescued, two Japanese from the insurance company came to investigate the reason, and Pi told them about his fantastic drifting journey. However, after hearing the story, the staff looked incredulous and questioned it. First of all, where is the cannibal island? In addition, bananas cannot float on the water, so how can an orangutan ride on a floating banana? Both of them thought the story was too fantastic, and they wanted Pi to tell a true and credible story so that they could report to the company. Therefore, Pi told another version of the story. There are no animals or islands in this story. After the storm, only 4 people survived on the lifeboat: the grumpy chef, the Buddhist sailor Pi, and the mother who came later on a banana. The sailor accidentally broke his leg when he jumped off the boat, so he became a burden in the eyes of the chef. In order to survive, the cruel chef killed the sailor and used his meat as bait for fishing. The mother just expressed dissatisfaction with the chef's cruelty, but was brutally killed by the chef, and her body was thrown into the sea. The angry Pi killed the chef directly and finally sailed across the ocean to Mexico alone. Hearing this version of the story, the 2 staff members were already stunned. They didn't seem to like this version and just left without saying anything more. Many years later, a writer found Pi again, hoping to find inspiration from his fantasy story. This time Pi told him 2 stories directly. After hearing them, the writer instantly realized that the 2 stories were actually about the same thing. The ferocious hyena is the cook, and the injured zebra is the sailor. The gorilla on the banana boat is Pi's mother, and the so-called tiger is Pi himself, the evil thoughts in Pi's heart. The reason why the tiger did not turn back when he was rescued was because Pi himself had no evil thoughts. No one can tell the truth from the false of these 2 stories. But the same thing is that no matter which version, Pi lost his family and experienced the suffering of drifting. Then Pi asked the writer a question: which story do you like better? The writer thought about it and said that he liked the version with animals. Pi was very pleased with this. In fact, he himself was more willing to believe the first story. After all, he was closer to God's will and would not let himself fall into endless cruel memories. After the story was told, the writer opened the report results on the table. Fortunately, the staff who conducted the investigation at that time also believed the first story with animals. They thought Pi was a brave man, and he was accompanied by a tiger in such a fantasy drift. In the end, he was successfully rescued with his tenacious willpower. Today, Pi is married and has children and lives a happy life. No matter which story it is, it can't change his pace to start a new life. As for Pi's fantasy drifting stories, whichever one you believe in is real. Life of Pi is directed by Taiwanese director Ong Lee starring Suraj Sharma and Irfan Khan, a fantasy adventure movie released in 2012 until now. Many people are still focusing on the truth behind the film. It seems that after understanding the truth, they will understand the real experience of Pi. In fact, these experiences are not important, and which story is not important to Pi. What's important is that he was finally rescued successfully. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience in watching. Looking forward to meeting you next time.